My name is Madison Hale. I'm 36, and I paid for my sister's entire wedding. The venue, the food, the photographer, even my parents' flights. I thought I was helping family. Then my mother called. Your sister doesn't want you there. And we all agreed. In that moment, something inside me went still. They had used my money to erase me. But every dollar, every contract, every receipt was still in my name. So a week later, when the vows began and the music played, the lights went out, the cards declined, and silence became my answer. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. The light outside my office had that late afternoon gold, the kind that makes everything look warmer than it really is. My desk was clean files stacked neatly, a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold beside my laptop. I was adjusting the final numbers on a client's retirement plan when my phone buzzed across the desk. Mom's name lit the screen. I answered without thinking. Hey, Mom. Her voice was soft but tight, like she'd rehearsed every word. Lauren doesn't want you at the wedding. And we all agreed it's for the best. For a moment, I thought I misheard her. I've already booked my flight, I said, trying to laugh it off. I helped plan half of it. Remember? She cut me off quickly. That's exactly why, sweetheart. You make things complicated. This is Lauren's weekend. A sound in the background. Laughter high and careless. My sister. Then Dad's voice low and deliberate. You should respect her wishes. Maddie, don't make this harder than it has to be. My throat went dry. I could hear the faint clink of Glass's voices echoing maybe dinner at their house. So that's it, I said quietly. Silence. Then the line went dead. I kept the phone pressed to my ear until the screen dimmed. There was no apology, no hesitation, not even the awkward promise to talk later. Just a decision handed down like a verdict. I set the phone down and stared at it until the edges of the room blurred. My heart was pounding, but my body felt still, like everything inside me had stopped moving. After a minute, I opened my laptop. The folder labeled Wedding Budget 2023 waited where I'd left it. I clicked it open. Rows of numbers filled the screen. A $5,000 venue deposit at Magnolia Grove, $200 to the catering company, $100 to the photographer, plane tickets for Mom and Dad, floral invoices, printed invitations. Every confirmation email had my name at the top, my credit card, my signature. I scrolled slowly, tracing the total at the bottom of the spreadsheet with my cursor. $12,300. I tried to remember when it started. Probably when Mom called last summer asking if I could just front the deposit until Lauren and Ethan sorted out their finances. I'd said yes without thinking, because that's what I always did. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. The office was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air vent. Outside the glass wall, the city's reflection shimmered in orange and gray. They really did it, I whispered. Hearing it out loud made it real. For years I'd been the reliable one. The one who picked up the pieces, paid the bills when someone forgot, smoothed things over when voices rose. I told myself it was love that families helped each other. But sitting there watching the numbers on the screen, I realized love shouldn't leave you feeling like a ledger someone forgot to balance. A laugh escaped me, short, bitter, hollow. It startled even me. I closed the spreadsheet and stared at my reflection in the dark screen. My face looked composed, maybe too composed. The kind of calm that comes when you're too tired to fall apart. The sunset caught the edge of the blinds, throwing thin bars of light across my desk. I picked up my mug and took a sip. The coffee was cold and bitter. It fit. I used to think love was an investment, I murmured to no one. Turns out, I've just been the sponsor of my own erasure. I stood, stretching my back. The room suddenly too quiet, too sterile. The office lights outside had begun to flicker on one floor at a time. I poured the coffee down the sink in the break room, watching the dark liquid swirl away, disappearing without a sound. When I returned to my desk, the sky outside had shifted to deep purple. I shut down the computer, slipped my phone into my bag, and turned off the light. As I closed the door behind me, the reflection in the glass caught a figure that looked steady, calm, maybe even indifferent. But my chest burned with something sharp and heavy. Disbelief wrapped in clarity. In the parking lot, the air smelled of rain. I sat in my car for a while, both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the empty space ahead. There was nothing left to say. They'd made their choice. By the time I pulled onto the highway, the sun was gone completely, and the road stretched out in front of me, like a clean ledger waiting for me to decide what to erase next. Rain tapped against the window, soft and steady, the kind of sound that fills the silence when your mind won't stop talking. My apartment was small but neat, the kind of space where everything had its place. Except apparently my family. The only light came from the laptop on the table. The glow washed over the stack of papers beside it, and the half-eaten sandwich I'd forgotten about hours ago. I opened my email. The inbox felt like a museum of misplaced trust. Scroll after scroll, there they were, messages from Mom and Lauren. Thank you. We'll pay you back soon. You're a lifesaver, Maddie. I clicked one at random from 6 months ago. Mom had written, "Just until Lauren's next paycheck clears, sweetie. You're always so dependable." I stared at the words. Dependable. It used to sound like a compliment. Now it felt like a warning label I hadn't noticed stuck to my forehead. I kept reading. Each thank you hit harder, like a small cut you don't feel until it starts to sting. My cursor hovered over the oldest thread. Subject line: venue deposit confirmation. It was dated last May. The email chain showed every transaction, every payment I'd made, every time someone said, "You're the best, Maddie," I whispered to the empty room. The best. At what? I leaned back, closing my eyes. The rain grew louder. The smell of coffee from hours ago hung in the air, bitter and flat. When I opened my eyes, I clicked over to the Excel file still pinned to my taskbar. The cells glowed a calm shade of blue. Venue $5,000. Catering $200. Photographer $1,100. Flights $400. Flowers $600. I printed the sheet, the printer humming quietly beside the fridge. As the paper slid out, I grabbed a red pen and drew thick lines across each unpaid item. The sound of the pen scratching paper was strangely satisfying, almost like breathing again. The laptop chimed. An incoming call. Maggie. Her face appeared on the screen, framed by the fluorescent lights of our office. "Hey," she said softly. "You didn't answer my texts. You okay?" I tried to smile, but it didn't stick. "I think they just made me wake up." She tilted her head, worry creasing her brow. "What happened?" I exhaled slowly. "They called this afternoon. Mom, Dad, Lauren. Told me I'm not welcome at the wedding." Maggie blinked, stunned. "You're kidding." I shook my head. "I wish I was." "They said it's better for everyone." She frowned. "After you paid for everything," I gave a small, humorless laugh. "Apparently money doesn't buy family. How much are we talking?" I looked at the paper on the wall. $12,300. Her eyes widened. "Maddie, that's—" "I know." I cut her off, voice calm but tight. Enough for them to celebrate without me. Maggie leaned closer to the camera. "You can't just let that go." "What would you do?" I asked. "Call and beg for a seat at their table?" She paused, then shook her head. "No, I'd make sure they never eat off that table again." That made me laugh, for real quiet but genuine. "You always did have a flair for drama." "Not drama," she said. "Justice." The call ended after a few more quiet minutes, both of us running out of words. When the screen went dark, the apartment felt heavier, like the air had thickened. I looked around. Everything was still in its place, tidy, predictable. The only thing out of order was me. I taped the printed list to the wall beside my desk. The red slashes looked like open wounds against the paper. Under the total, $12,300, I uncapped a black marker and wrote one word beneath it in bold, deliberate strokes. Payback. The ink bled slightly into the paper fibers. I stood there, arms crossed, staring at it. The word looked solid, final. The rain outside softened, turning to a mist that blurred the city lights. Somewhere down the street, a car horn echoed, then faded. I walked to the window and rested my forehead against the cool glass. "I'm done being the dependable one," I whispered. For a long moment, I just stood there, watching the drops slide down the pane, streaking the reflections of the city below. Then I turned back to the wall, the list, the numbers, the word beneath them, and felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not sadness. Just a decision beginning to take shape, quiet and precise. The printer light blinked off. The apartment fell still again. I shut the laptop, the soft click echoing in the silence, and let the darkness fill the room. The cafe was half full, the kind of quiet place where people whispered over laptops and the milk frother hissed like background static. I sat near the window, the gray sky outside blurring the outlines of downtown Raleigh. My latte had gone lukewarm. The foam collapsed into a pale ring around the edge of the cup. I'd been staring at my phone for nearly 10 minutes, scrolling through nothing when it buzzed. Chloe Adams. I hadn't seen her name since the bridal group chat weeks ago, the one I'd been quietly removed from. Her message was short. "I don't agree with how they treated you. You should hear this." For a second, I didn't move. Then a file started downloading at the bottom of the screen. I hesitated, watching the bar crawl forward. My thumb hovered over play. The recording clicked alive. The first voice was Lauren's, light familiar, dripping with irritation. "Just keep her name on the payments," she said. "We need that card active until after the wedding." Then Mom's voice, measured, confident. "Madison won't complain. She likes to control things with money. Let her feel useful." Laughter followed. Multiple voices. I recognized Dad's chuckle in the background, low and agreeing. It was only 10 seconds long, but it felt endless. I replayed it twice just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The sound of my own family laughing about me, about the one thing I thought was love expressed through help, landed like a cold slap. I set the phone down, the edges slick under my fingers. My chest felt hollow. The cafe noise faded. I stared at the condensation on the window until the lights outside blurred into streaks. There are moments that freeze you from the inside out. That one did. For years, I'd defended them to myself. Mom's comments about my rigidity. Lauren's passive jabs about me acting like the accountant of the family. I'd brushed them off as jokes. But hearing it like this in their voices sealed something shut inside me. I picked up the phone again, hit save, and renamed the file, Proof Wedding 2024. My thumb lingered over the screen before locking it. The latte had gone cold. I left it half-finished and walked home. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain, soft against my coat, rhythmic against the pavement. Raleigh looked washed out, the streetlights, hazy through the water. When I reached my apartment, I towed off my shoes and set my purse on the counter. The air inside was warm and still. I powered up my laptop and sat down. The spreadsheet I'd printed 2 nights ago was still taped to the wall. The red lines slashed across it glowed faintly in the lamplight. I opened the digital copy and scrolled to the top. The column headers stared back vendor amount status. I added a new column beside them. Refund status. The cursor blinked at me. Patient. Venue. Pending refund. Catering. Pending refund. Photographer. Pending refund. Flights. Pending refund. Flowers. Pending refund. 5 entries. 5 promises to myself. I renamed the folder on my desktop. The old one said wedding budget. The new title felt colder, cleaner refund plan. I sat back in my chair, the glow from the laptop washing over my face. The rain outside tapped steady against the glass. My reflection looked calm, composed, but my eyes didn't match the rest of me. They looked sharper, harder. They'd called me cold before. I remembered Mom saying it once at Thanksgiving when I refused to bail Lauren out of another impulsive purchase. "You're so calculated, Madison," she'd said, laughing as if it were a quirk. "You'd probably balance your emotions in Excel if you could." Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd always been cold. But that coldness was what kept me standing when everyone else spent freely. Money, emotions, loyalty, without thought. I closed the spreadsheet and leaned back. The apartment lights reflected off the glass window beside me. Outside, someone walked a dog through the rain, the leash a faint streak of red. I watched them disappear into the mist. A faint ache pulsed behind my eyes, not from sadness, but from clarity. They thought I wouldn't react, that I'd swallow it like I always did. But they'd forgotten something I'd built my entire life on, keeping things stable. Budgets, accounts, consequences. If they thought I wouldn't balance this ledger, they didn't know me at all. I reached for the mouse again, scrolling through my email drafts. Each confirmation, each receipt, each automatic payment reminder. They'd lived for years in my inbox unnoticed. Now they looked different, like quiet witnesses waiting to speak. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed a single note in the margin of the spreadsheet. Documentation equals freedom. I hit save. The rain had stopped. The world outside looked clean scrubbed raw by water and light. I shut the laptop and rested my head against the chair. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed. Low, steady, fading into nothing. "They think I'm not cold enough to push back," I whispered. "But the cold is what saved us when everything almost fell apart before. It'll save me now." The room went quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for peace. It claims it. Noah's office sat on the 10th floor of a downtown high-rise, all glass and sharp lines. The kind of place where everything smelled faintly of paper and control. The view overlooked the city. The streets below lined with coffee shops and late-afternoon traffic inching through yellow lights. I walked in holding a folder so thick it felt like it carried more than paper. It carried 4 years of blind trust and $12,000 of misplaced faith. Noah looked up from his laptop and smiled the way people do when they're about to deliver bad news gently. "Hey, stranger," he said. "You look like someone who's been auditing a crime scene." Something like that. I said, setting the folder down on his desk. "I need you to tell me what's mine." He leaned forward, flipping open the folder. The papers spread across the glass surface. Receipts, confirmation emails, printouts of contracts from the venue catering company photographer, even flight itineraries. His brows drew together as he read, lips moving silently through the lines. "Okay," he murmured after a minute. "Every single payment was made on your card. No cosigners. No joint authorization." He looked up at me. "You're the sole payer. That means you hold full control of those funds. Under Section 75 of the credit law, you're entitled to claim a refund if the goods or services weren't rendered." I nodded slowly, though the words took a moment to land. "And if they try to sue me?" He smiled. Not condescending, just confident. "They won't win. You can't breach a contract you paid for and later rescind it under lawful terms. They have no claim over money they never owned." For a moment, I just watched him shuffle the papers back into a neat pile. The sound was rhythmic, steadying. "I'm not doing this to humiliate them," I said quietly. "I just want what's fair." "Fair," he repeated. "That's a good word for it." He leaned back, studying me. "You know most people who come here with family disputes want blood. You don't." "I already bled," I said. That made him pause. Then he nodded. "All right. Here's what you do. Call each vendor. Don't explain too much. Just reference your payment and the cancellation clause. Keep everything in writing. Emails, not calls. Use the phrase refund request under Section 75. It'll get their attention. I took the notes as he spoke, writing each instruction in neat block letters on my legal pad. Refund isn't revenge, it's recovery, I wrote at the top without really thinking. When we finished, he gathered the papers back into the folder and handed it to me. Keep this organized. The law loves order. Outside, the sky had shifted from gray to a soft lavender haze. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, the sound of traffic humming around me. The air smelled faintly of rain, that metallic scent that always comes right before a storm. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot, fleeting. What I felt now was cold, structured, like a line drawn neatly down the center of a page. One side labeled, what I gave the other, what I'll take back. I drove home as the city lights blinked on one by one. The hum of tires on wet asphalt was almost hypnotic. I didn't play music. I didn't need noise. At home, I spread the folder across my kitchen table. My apartment looked smaller tonight, maybe because the paperwork took up so much space, or maybe because I could finally see everything clearly. Every document had my name printed on it, bold and unambiguous. Madison Hale, payer. I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Refund Plan. The cursor blinked, waiting. I began typing, the sound of the keys filling the quiet. 1. Magnolia Grove Venue. $5,000. 2. Cater Co. Events. $3,200. 3. Light Frame Photography. $100. 4. Delta Airlines. $2,400. 5. Bloomhouse Florals. $600. Deadline for refund requests. Before April 20th, 2024. I saved the file, then opened my email drafts. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing the first line of the message to the venue. Dear Magnolia Grove Accounting, I am writing to request a refund for the deposit paid on May 2nd, 2023, in accordance with Clause 14B of our contract. The words came easily, almost mechanically. Years of financial correspondence had trained me for this kind of precision. But this wasn't just business. It was reclamation. By the time I'd drafted all 5 emails, it was past midnight. The rain had started again, tapping gently against the glass balcony door. I stood and stretched, rubbing my neck. The city glowed below, quiet, detached, efficient. I looked around my apartment. Everything I owned, I'd earned myself. Every bill, every piece of furniture, every item had my name attached to it. Yet the one thing I'd funded most generously, my family's affection, had never belonged to me. I picked up the pen and scrawled across a sticky note, refund initiated, 04/02/24. I pressed it to the corner of the monitor. When I finally shut down the computer, the reflection staring back at me in the dark screen didn't look angry or wounded anymore. It looked deliberate. I poured a glass of water and sat on the edge of the couch. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere far off, low and steady, like the sound of a train crossing invisible tracks. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. Not peace, not yet, but direction. Tomorrow I'd start making calls. Tonight, I let the silence have me. The days that followed blurred together. Quiet, methodical 7 left before the wedding. My apartment had become a command center. The blinds were half drawn, the only light the pale blue from my laptop screen reflecting across the glass of half-finished water on my desk. The cursor blinked over the draft email to Magnolia Springs Estate. I reread it once more before dialing. The line rang twice before a man answered, his voice rehearsed and polite. Magnolia Springs. This is Jeff Myers speaking. This is Madison Hale, I said evenly. I'm calling to request a refund on the venue deposit according to Clause 14B of our agreement. There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear him shuffle papers. Mrs. Hale, I'm sorry. Your sister is listed as the event planner. She's our main contact. I cut in before he could finish. She's the planner, I said. I'm the payer. That makes me the client under that clause. The silence stretched for a few seconds before he cleared his throat. I see. One moment, please. He put me on hold, and a faint instrumental loop hummed through the line. Something meant to sound calm but only underscored the tension. When he came back, his tone had shifted. All right, Miss Hale, I'll forward your request to our accounting department. It'll take 3 business days to process. Thank you, I said, voice steady. Please send written confirmation to my email. When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the dark laptop screen for a long moment. Calm, precise, detached. Exactly what I needed to be. Next came the catering company. I opened a new email attaching a PDF of the signed contract, my credit card statement, and the original invoice. The subject line read, Refund request under Section 75, Hale event. Within an hour, a reply landed in my inbox. Natalie Ford, the catering company's accountant, wrote, We've reviewed your documentation. Your refund has been approved and will be processed within 3 days. The efficiency of it almost surprised me. Maybe justice was just paperwork when done correctly. The third task took more patience. Light frame photography. I'd expected resistance, and I was right. The reply came from an address signed Ben, senior photographer. Hi, Madison. Unfortunately, we can't issue a refund as we've already conducted pre-wedding sessions and blocked off the event date. I exhaled through my nose, leaning back in the chair. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I began typing. Ben, per our contract dated May 20th, 2023, Section 6A, states that payment covers the event day itself. The pre-wedding session was complimentary, not billable. Please confirm this aligns with your own records. The response came 20 minutes later. Short? You're correct. We can refund 70% after subtracting administrative fees. I typed back a single line. Accepted. When the email sent, I sat in the quiet and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The rain outside had returned faint against the window pane, just steady enough to fill the silence. They call me cold, I murmured to myself, my voice barely above a whisper. But that cold is what keeps me alive in a family that burns through everything warm. The sound of my own voice startled me a little. It was calm, certain, not the voice of someone hurt, but of someone counting steps, balancing columns. One by one, I highlighted the refund status column in green beside each successful entry. Magnolia Springs. Confirmed. Caterco. Confirmed. Lightframe. Partial. Delta Airlines. Pending. Bloomhouse. Confirmed. The spreadsheet glowed like a quiet victory. The total came to $12,300. I stared at the number until it blurred slightly, the way light bends when your eyes sting, but you refuse to blink. My phone buzzed. A text from Maggie. Did you start? I typed back. Almost done, then deleted it. Instead, I sent, yes. The reply came a minute later. Proud of you. Remember, boundaries aren't cruelty. I smiled faintly. Boundaries. I repeated under my breath, as if testing how the word felt in my mouth. It tasted clean. By evening, the sky outside had gone from silver to deep indigo. The streetlights flickered on, throwing soft amber reflections across my window. I stood and stretched, crossing to the small kitchen. The air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and rain. I poured a cup and returned to my desk. On the wall, the paper list was still taped beside my laptop, the one with red slashes marking every expense. I picked up a green pen and drew a check mark beside each one. The color looked different now, brighter under the lamp. It wasn't the red of loss anymore. It was the green of reclamation. For the first time in weeks, I checked my bank app. The pending deposits appeared in neat digital rows. 5 transactions, all reversed, waiting to settle. My thumb hovered over the screen before locking it. I didn't smile, but I felt my shoulders loosen. By the time midnight came, the room was still. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left. The sticky note that said payback lay on the desk, curling slightly at the edges. I pressed it flat again with my palm, the ink faintly smudged but still readable under the lamplight. I leaned back, staring at the glow of the laptop. My reflection stared back at me. Same face, same eyes, but something behind them had shifted. I'd spent years thinking peace meant keeping the peace. But sometimes peace looks like pressing send. The rain softened to a whisper outside. I closed my laptop, the room dimming around me, and whispered the only words that felt true in that moment. Every dollar returns home eventually. The morning sun came in soft over Raleigh, spilling gold across my kitchen counter. I poured coffee into my favorite chipped mug, the one I'd had since college, and opened my laptop. The first email waiting for me was from the bank. Subject line, refund completed. Venue, catering, flights. I stared at the line for a long moment, the steam from my cup curling upward like smoke from something that had already burned. One click opened the confirmation page, clean and clinical, every transaction reversed, every cent returned to its rightful owner. I scrolled through the rest of my inbox. No new messages from my family. Not that I expected any. Out of curiosity, I opened a browser and typed my sister's name into the search bar. Her face filled the screen instantly. Pre-wedding photos. Charleston sunlight. White dress, champagne in hand, all smiles. Her fiancé Ethan with his hand on her waist, their friends laughing behind them. Mom and Dad standing near the floral arch, both glowing as if the world had finally arranged itself the way they wanted. I sipped my coffee. They got their perfect day, I whispered to myself. Then quieter. They just don't know who paid for it. The city outside my window was just waking up. Traffic murmuring a siren in the distance, the soft rise of morning sounds that had nothing to do with me. I closed the browser, pushed the laptop a few inches away, and sat in the stillness. Around noon, I folded laundry, washed the dishes, let the news play low in the background. For once, the silence didn't ache. At 1:04 p.m., my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up. A message from Chloe. Venue's refusing to open. They said the balance was reversed. Do you know anything about this? I read it twice before setting the phone face down. At 2:07, another vibration. Catering company just called. They canceled. Payment declined. By 2:45, my hands were steady, my breathing even. I poured another cup of coffee. The afternoon light shifted, warmer long stripes of gold reaching across the hardwood floor. At 3:10, the phone buzzed again. Email this time. Light frame photography. Subject payment declined. Wedding coverage suspended. I clicked it open, scanning the words slowly, deliberately, like a contract closing itself. Then came the call. Ethan's name flashed across the screen, all caps, like a warning. I let it ring twice before answering. What the hell did you do? His voice was tight, angry, echoing somewhere outdoors. I could hear shouting in the background, car doors slamming, muffled voices, chaos. I took back what was mine, I said. You ruined everything. No, I corrected softly. I stopped paying for everything. I ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute. I imagined the scene as it unfolded 300 miles away, the sprawling lawn at Magnolia Springs. The white chairs neatly arranged, guests in pastel dresses shifting in confusion. The music cutting off mid-song. The planner frantically calling vendors trying to find out why nothing was arriving. My mother's voice rising over the commotion, sharp and panicked. Lauren crying mascara, running, Ethan pacing, phone in hand. For a moment, I felt almost sorry for them. Almost. But then, I remembered every message, every assumption, every time they'd leaned on my wallet like it was a given. And that softness evaporated. I moved to the window, holding my mug in both hands. The light was beginning to dim, a haze settling over the rooftops. Somewhere below, a neighbor laughed, the sound distant and easy. I turned back to the counter, opened the laptop again, and refreshed my inbox. The refund confirmations glowed in neat lines, processed, complete, irreversible. They thought I'd beg, I said quietly to no one. They thought silence meant weakness. The clock ticked toward 4. I imagined the moment the guests started leaving, heels clicking on pavement, whispers spreading. The moment when Mom finally realized what had happened and that her oldest daughter, her dependable, invisible accountant, had finally balanced the books. A faint breeze slipped through the cracked window, carrying the smell of rain and magnolia. Charleston would smell like that too, I thought. Maybe the flowers I'd ordered still sat unopened in some delivery van. By 5, the sunlight had faded from gold to soft gray. I sat on the couch barefoot, legs tucked under me, the mug cooling in my hands. The city outside hummed steady and unaware. On the coffee table, the sticky note with the word payback had curled at one corner. I pressed it flat again. The ink faded slightly but still visible. I leaned back against the cushions and let my eyes close for a moment. I didn't picture the chaos anymore. The shouts, the panic, the embarrassment. I pictured the stillness that would come after the kind of silence that settles over people when they realize something's truly over. They'd called me cold. Maybe they were right. Cold doesn't plead. Cold doesn't explain. Cold simply stops feeding the fire. When I opened my eyes again, the sun had dropped below the horizon. I stood turned on the lamp and poured one last cup of coffee. The bitter warmth filled the air. Outside, the city lights flickered to life one by one. "They think I'll cry," I said softly, watching the reflection of myself in the glass. But tears don't change balance sheets. I took a slow sip, steady and calm. When the water runs out, logic is what remains. The phone buzzed again in the other room, but I didn't move to answer it. I just stood there, watching the night take the last of the light. By 8 that evening, the city outside my window had gone quiet. The last streaks of sunlight had faded, leaving only the soft hum of streetlights and the faint whir of traffic below. I sat on the couch laptop, open the blue glow casting shadows across the room. The smell of coffee still lingered from the afternoon. I wasn't sure why I opened Facebook. Maybe curiosity, maybe something colder than that. The homepage loaded slowly, then burst to life. Posts, tags, photos, chaos. The first thing I saw was Lauren's update. A long paragraph paired with a picture of her standing in front of Magnolia Springs, the sky dim and gray behind her. The caption read, "Catering and venue. Both failed us. Everything fell apart today. No one deserves to be betrayed like this." I scrolled. Dozens of comments poured in. Sympathy, outrage, pity. "You don't deserve this, girl. Unbelievable. What kind of business cancels on someone's wedding day?" Then a new comment appeared under the post. Jeff Myers, the venue owner. His profile photo was still the same professional headshot from his company website. His words were brief, polite, devastating. The event was canceled due to a refund issued by the cardholder. "We wish the family the best." For a moment, I just stared at it. Then the thread exploded. "What refund?" one commenter asked. Wait, wasn't the sister handling the money? Another wrote. Who even pays with someone else's card? The tone shifted fast and ruthless. Sympathy turned to scrutiny. Lauren tried replying, once a vague sentence about a misunderstanding, but the comments kept multiplying. Screenshots spread to local wedding groups. People debating what had happened. Some tagging the venue, others the catering company. I scrolled through it all without blinking. Every post, every hashtag, every line of outrage. Somewhere between the chaos, I found myself smiling. Not from joy, just recognition. "They don't need me to say anything," I said quietly, closing the lid of the laptop halfway. The truth always finds its way home. The phone buzzed beside me. Maggie's name appeared on the screen. "You seeing this? All of Charleston's gossip groups are blowing up. Your sister's name is everywhere." I typed back slowly. I only took back what was mine. Her reply came quick. And look how fast the universe delivered. I didn't answer. I leaned back into the couch, letting the glow of the screen fade to black. Across the state, I could picture it all too clearly. Lauren in her dress standing in a circle of half-packed decorations. Mom snapping at the planner demanding answers. Dad on the phone with the bank realizing too late that he couldn't control the account he'd never opened. Guests murmuring awkward gathering their coats. Maybe the band had tried to play something cheerful to fill the silence before giving up. Maybe someone had joked nervously just to cut the tension. And maybe at the end of it all, there'd been only the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as people walked out. I took a sip from my mug, now lukewarm, and glanced toward the window. The city looked calm, unaware of the small storm unraveling hours away. Raleigh was steady like that, unmoved, impartial. They wanted a wedding without me, I whispered. Now they have one. Silent, embarrassed, empty. The phone buzzed again, another message from Maggie. Do you feel anything? Relief, vindication. I stared at the screen for a moment before locking it. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was more like balance. Numbers evening out after years of being tilted one way. I stood and walked to the kitchen, refilling my mug. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. The light over the stove cast a golden circle on the counter, soft and ordinary. It felt like peace. When I walked back to the living room, I stopped to glance at the sticky note still stuck to the edge of my monitor. The word payback was fading. The ink smudged slightly at the corners. I pressed it flat again, smoothing the paper like it was a quiet seal on something final. The urge to call someone to tell them flickered briefly, and then vanished. I didn't need witnesses. The proof already lived in emails and bank statements and a comment thread spinning wildly without me. Outside, the streetlight flickered once and steadied. A couple walked by, their laughter faint under the hum of passing cars. I watched them disappear down the block, feeling the quiet settle around me like a blanket. I sat back down, reopened the laptop, and scrolled one last time through the posts. The words blurred together. Accusations, defenses, speculation. The internet had already moved on to outrage mode. Tomorrow there would be new gossip, new disasters, new people to judge. But tonight, it was them. I closed the computer completely and sat in the silence. My hands wrapped around the warm ceramic of the mug. The apartment felt still, anchored. Justice hadn't arrived with noise or drama. It had come quietly in the form of receipts, timelines, and the sound of someone else's story falling apart online. Outside my window, the city was calm lights glimmering against the dark. I exhaled slowly and let my eyes drift toward the skyline, a faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. The balance had been restored, and I hadn't needed to say a single word. The next morning, light crept weakly through the blinds, washing the apartment in a pale gray. My phone buzzed against the coffee table, steady and relentless. I ignored it for a minute, thinking it was another junk call, but when I finally reached over, the screen was filled with notifications. 63 missed calls. 17 new messages. For a moment, I just stared at the list of names. Mom, Dad, Lauren. Stacked one on top of another, the same sequence repeating like a pattern I'd seen all my life. The first message came from Mom. Maddie, please. Guests are leaving. Lauren is having a breakdown. You need to fix this. Please, sweetheart. The next was Dad. Your mother is crying. Don't let this destroy us. You can still make it right. Then Lauren's a flurry of texts, one after another. You ruined everything. You've always been jealous. I hate you. I set the phone back down on the table and leaned against the couch legs, drawn up the mug of coffee I'd made half an hour ago, now cold in my hands. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of the neighbor's footsteps above. I read Mom's message again, the one that started with please. It was almost funny. How easily the word changed meaning depending on who said it. For years I'd been the one saying it. Please let me explain. Please trust me. Please don't make me the bad guy. Now it was their turn. I put the mug down its base, leaving a faint ring on the coffee table. My thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling through their messages again, each one more desperate than the last. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They were asking for access. I pressed and held the volume button on the side of my phone until it vibrated, once switching to silent mode. Then, one by one, I toggled off the notifications, watching their names vanish from the top of the screen. The phone went still in my hand, the silence instant and complete. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the muted device as if it were something sacred. When the knock came, it startled me. I opened the door to find Maggie standing there in jeans and a sweatshirt, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "Emergency delivery," she said, raising the bag. "Blueberry muffins. Figured you could use something that isn't caffeine." I stepped aside to let her in. "You didn't have to come." "Please," she said, setting the bag down. "After last night, the whole city's talking. I wanted to make sure you weren't spiraling." "I'm fine," I said, and it was mostly true. Actually, I'm better than fine. She studied me for a beat, eyebrows lifting slightly. "Better," I nodded. "Because for once the silence belongs to me." Maggie smiled, small and knowing. "You always did look good in control." I handed her a mug and poured her coffee while she unwrapped the muffins. The smell of sugar and butter filled the kitchen, familiar and warm. We sat at the counter in quiet companionship, the kind that didn't need words. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" I took a slow sip, then set my cup down carefully. "No. And I don't need them to." The light outside brightened, slipping through the blinds in narrow stripes. Dust floated in the beams, moving lazily. For the first time in weeks, I felt my breath come evenly, unforced. "They think I destroyed their wedding," I said after a while. But I didn't. Maggie glanced at me. "No," I shook my head. "They destroyed it the day they decided my worth was measured in what I could pay for. All I did was stop funding the illusion." She nodded slowly, understanding. "You know, there's a strange kind of poetry in that." I smiled faintly. "Justice usually is." We talked for a few more minutes. Small things work the weather. Until the clock on the stove blinked 10:30. Maggie stood brushing crumbs from her hands. "Promise me you'll eat something real later." "I promise," I said. She looked at me one last time as if to make sure I wasn't faking the calm. Then she left the door, closing quietly behind her. I walked back to the window, the phone still on the counter face down. Outside, the sky was bright now, washed clean from the night before. Birds cut across the air, darting between rooftops. Somewhere below, someone laughed. I wrapped my arms around myself and let the sunlight touch my face. My pulse had slowed steady as a metronome. "They'll tell everyone I ruined their day," I said under my breath. But the truth is simpler. I turned back to the quiet apartment, to the cooling coffee, to the muted phone. "I didn't destroy their wedding," I whispered. "They just forgot that every wedding needs someone to pay the bill." The words hung in the air, soft and final. I let them stay there, then picked up my mug again and took another slow sip, the taste bitter and grounding. Outside, the city moved on, and so did I. 3 days later, my office was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft clack of my keyboard. The morning light poured through the tall window, bright and clean, the kind that made everything look sharper. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I was halfway through reviewing a client portfolio when the notification pinged. A new email. The subject line caught my eye immediately. "Inquiry regarding Magnolia Springs event." It was from a woman named Emily Torres, a reporter for Southern Living. Her message was polite professional, but the undertone was unmistakable. "Ms. Hale. I'm investigating reports surrounding the recent wedding cancellation at Magnolia Springs. There appears to be confusion over vendor payments and accounting discrepancies. Are you willing to confirm any information?" I read it twice. Her tone was careful. No accusations, just curiosity sharpened by instinct. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed my reply. Every vendor payment for that event was made from my personal credit card. All documentation can verify this. That was all I wrote. No emotion, no elaboration. Just fact. I hit send and closed the email, the cursor blinking on the empty screen for a few seconds before I returned to work. By the end of the day, I'd almost forgotten about it. 3 mornings later, Maggie sent me a link before I even left for the office. Her message was simple. You might want to read this. The headline sat in bold across my phone screen. Local planner's wedding canceled over unpaid vendors. The article ran longer than I expected. It detailed the events at Magnolia Springs, the refund transactions, the vendors' statements. A small photo of Lauren taken months earlier at some charity event sat beneath the subheading. The quotes were clinical. Jeff Myers, the venue owner, confirmed the cancellation due to reversal of client payment. Natalie from the catering company cited chargebacks initiated by the original cardholder. Nowhere did my name appear. But it didn't need to. I scrolled slowly line by line. When I reached the end, I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When the truth finally made it to print, I murmured, I didn't feel vindicated, just balanced. I clicked the article, closed the reflection of my face faint in the dark screen. The quiet hum of the office filled the space around me. Across the state, the ripple had already started. Maggie forwarded me a few screenshots later that day. Lauren's event planning page had gone silent. A few of her old clients had commented under previous posts. Questions about professionalism, about unpaid deposits. One had already announced she'd taken her business elsewhere. A text from Mom came that evening. Just one line. Your sister's devastated. I hope this makes you happy. I didn't answer. The next morning, another message appeared. This time from Dad. Your mother's embarrassed. She's been avoiding her friends. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long moment before locking the phone. The truth didn't require conversation. It required consequences. By the time I reached the office that afternoon, Maggie was waiting at my desk. She had a copy of the Southern Living print issue in her hand, folded open to the article. She dropped it gently onto the table. They're all talking about it, she said. The vendors, the social media groups, everyone. I glanced at the headline, then at her. Are they angry? Some are, she said. Most just seem curious. But your sister's getting heat. A few people think she used your name to book things under false pretenses. I nodded slowly. They're not wrong. Maggie watched me for a moment. Do you ever feel bad I looked out the window at the sunlight breaking through the clouds? No, I said finally. Not bad, just clear. She gave a half smile, shaking her head. They're paying for what they did, Maddie. I turned back to her. No, I corrected gently. They're just learning how to pay for themselves. She laughed softly, low and warm. That's one way to look at it. After she left, I sat alone at my desk, the magazine still open beside my laptop. I picked it up and studied the photo again. The smiling faces that had once shut me out. I traced the edge of the page with my thumb before setting it down. I opened a new folder on my computer and named it Proof Public. Then I saved a PDF copy of the article inside. The click of the mouse sounded final, like the closing of a ledger. Outside, the streets buzzed faintly with traffic, the hum of life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time, the story didn't belong to them. It belonged to the truth. And the truth at last had a receipt. I sat back, letting the quiet fill the room, the morning light glinting off the framed photo on my shelf. One I hadn't taken down yet. Mom. Dad, Lauren, me. 4 smiles, 1 lie. I thought about deleting it, but I didn't. Instead, I turned it face down the glass against the desk. Some things didn't need to be erased. They just needed to be filed away. A week later, the air had turned warmer, the the kind of spring day where everything outside smelled faintly of rain and renewal. I stopped by the mailroom on my way upstairs, sorting through the usual pile of envelopes, utility bills, circulars, a flyer for some local art show. Then tucked between them, I found one thicker than the rest. My name was typed neatly across the front in bold letters, the return address from a law firm in Charleston. I knew before I opened it. Inside was a printed letter, 3 pages long, written in the kind of language meant to sound like authority, but laced with desperation. Our client, Mrs. Lauren Edwards, asserts that your actions caused significant financial loss and reputational damage to the Edwards family. We demand a written apology and restitution for all incurred expenses within 10 business days to avoid escalation. I let the pages fall onto the counter, the paper curling slightly at the edges. For a few seconds, I just stared at them, not angry, just amazed at the audacity. Then I took a photo of the first page and sent it to Noah with a single message. "Need your eyes on this." His reply came less than a minute later. "Come by my office tomorrow. Bring the whole thing." The next morning, his assistant ushered me in as soon as I arrived. Noah was leaning back in his chair, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He motioned for the envelope. I handed it over, watching as he read silently, his expression shifting from mild interest to amused disbelief. "Let me guess," he said, finally looking up. "Your sister's lawyer wrote this." I nodded. "Apparently I've ruined her life." He smirked. "If by ruin they mean forced accountability, then maybe—" He tapped the paper with his pen. "This is empty. There's no legal standing here. Every refund was processed through legitimate channels, all under your cardholder rights. They can huff and puff, but this won't stand up anywhere." "So what happens now?" I asked. He flipped to the last page, scanning the closing paragraph before sliding the stack aside. "Now I answer them. I'll cite Section 75 of the credit law and remind them of the merchant confirmation trail. There's no breach, no fraud, no defamation. They're bluffing, trying to save face." He began typing immediately, his tone casual but precise as his fingers moved across the keyboard. "You know, most lawsuits like this are more about image than justice," he said. "They file because it looks like action, not because they expect to win." I watched him work for a while, the clatter of keys steady, confident. There was something soothing about watching someone who understood order dismantle chaos with nothing but facts. After a few minutes, he looked up again. "Done. My response will go out today. Short, clean, unshakable." "What did you say?" He grinned. "That all refunds were executed by the rightful cardholder and that no contractual obligations remain in dispute. Translation: they don't have a leg to stand on." I exhaled slowly, the tension I hadn't realized I'd been holding finally slipping out. "So it's over." "It will be," he said. "Give it 2 days. They'll fold." He was right. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. Same law firm, shorter letter. The first line read simply, "After review, our client has chosen not to pursue further legal action. No apology, of course. Just retreat dressed in formality." I read it once, then folded the letter neatly and slid it into the back of my file drawer. The sound of the drawer closing felt final, like a quiet seal. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, letting the afternoon light stretch across the apartment. "Justice doesn't always look like victory," I said softly to myself. "Sometimes it's just silence, protected by law." The phone buzzed on the counter. A new message from Mom. "You've humiliated the entire family." Madison. Was this worth it? I locked the screen without replying. Another ping followed almost immediately. Lauren this time. Family can forgive, but we don't forget. Her words sat there for a few seconds before I took a screenshot and saved it into my archive folder with the rest. Proof nothing more. By evening, the tension had lifted completely. I left my phone on the counter, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the sky fading into lavender as the city lights blinked on one by one. I walked without direction, just letting the rhythm of my steps and the sound of traffic fill the quiet. The street curved along the river, and I paused at the railing watching the water catch the light, gold at the edges, dark in the middle, moving steadily forward. For months my life had been noise, accusations, calls, messages, anger. But tonight, everything was still. Somewhere behind me, a musician strummed a guitar near the cafe on the corner. The melody drifted across the street, soft and simple. I smiled faintly. The law hadn't just cleared my name. It had drawn a line no one could cross again. I stayed there until the sun slipped below the horizon, the city quieting into its nighttime rhythm. And when I finally turned to walk home, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace without permission. A month later, summer had settled over Raleigh with its soft heat and long afternoons. My new apartment sat 3 floors up in a quiet building near the park. The windows stretched wide across the living room, catching the morning light that poured through in gold sheets. For the first time in years, I woke to stillness that didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. I was unpacking the last of the boxes when the knock came. Light polite. When I opened the door, a woman stood there holding a wicker basket wrapped in a blue ribbon. Her smile was warm and steady, the kind that carried both kindness and experience. "Madison Hale," she asked. "That's me," I said. "I'm Hannah Lewis." "I live next door," she said, lifting the basket. "I brought you some cookies, oatmeal raisin. Don't hold that against me." I laughed softly. "Never. Come in, please." She stepped inside, taking in the bright, half-unpacked room. "Nice place. I read about you, you know. The article. You were very brave." I froze for half a second, then smiled carefully. That's one word for it. She set the basket on the counter and looked at me with a gentleness that disarmed me. "You didn't do anything wrong, honey. You just stopped letting people take what they didn't earn." The words landed somewhere deep, heavier than I expected. I busied myself making tea to give my hands something to do. "Sometimes it doesn't feel brave," I admitted. "Sometimes it just feels cold." Hannah sat at the small dining table, folding her hands around the cup I handed her. "Cold isn't bad," she said. "Cold means you stopped burning yourself to keep everyone else warm." There's wisdom in that. For the first time in a long while, I laughed. Not the polite kind, but a real one that reached my chest. I think I needed to hear that. "You remind me of my daughter," she said, smiling. She used to think saying no made her selfish. Took her 50 years to realize it just made her sane. We sat there for nearly an hour, talking about families and faith, about the strange weight of expectations women carry without noticing. She told me about her late husband, about the quiet she learned to love after years of noise. I told her about spreadsheets and refunds, and how freedom sometimes starts with a transaction. When she finally stood to leave, she squeezed my hand. "You're not cold, Madison," she said. "You just learned how to keep your own warmth." After she left, the apartment felt fuller, not emptier. The faint smell of tea and cookies lingered in the air, a reminder that kindness could arrive even when you weren't expecting it. I turned toward the desk by the window where my laptop waited. The cursor blinked on a blank document titled "The Second Ledger, Proposal Draft." I started typing the words, flowing easier than I thought they would. Objective to create a financial literacy fund for women reclaiming control over their resources and autonomy. Each sentence felt like a brick laid on new ground, the foundation of something that wasn't born from revenge but from renewal. By the time I reached the section marked Timeline, I wrote launch date, July 2024. I saved the document and attached it to an email addressed to the Raleigh Community Empowerment Foundation. In the subject line, I typed simply, "Grant application, the second ledger." Before I hit send, I paused, rereading the opening paragraph. It didn't sound like the voice of someone recovering. It sounded like someone beginning. The whoosh of the sent email filled the apartment with the smallest, quietest kind of satisfaction. Not long after my phone buzzed, Maggie's name appeared. "Did you just send what I think you did?" she asked when I answered. I smiled. Proposal's in. Now we wait. You're unbelievable, she said, laughing. That's how you end a story, with a new chapter. It's not an ending, I said, glancing out at the park where the sunlight rippled through the trees. It's just the first time I've written the ledger for myself. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, You sound different. I feel different. When the call ended, I stayed at the window a little longer, watching kids chase each other through the grass, a couple walking hand in hand along the path, the world moving in quiet, steady rhythm. The past still existed somewhere behind me, folded into old files and court letters, but it no longer clung. The silence that had once hurt now hummed with something else. Life possibility. Peace. I sat back down at my desk, opening a fresh document, and began typing ideas for workshops, sponsors, partnerships. My fingers moved with certainty, each keystroke its own small promise. Outside, the sun climbed higher, warm and forgiving. Inside, the room filled with light. By mid-June, the city had settled into the thick warmth of summer. The Raleigh Convention Center buzzed with the low hum of voices and footsteps as hundreds of people filled the ballroom for the Financial Literacy Summit. Banners hung across the stage, bright blues and whites with the words, Empowerment Through Knowledge. I stood just behind the curtain, fingers brushing the note cards in my hand, even though I didn't plan to read from them. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. When the host called my name, Please welcome Madison Hale, founder of the Second Ledger. A ripple of applause moved through the room. The stage lights were bright, almost too bright, but I stepped into them calmly. From the podium, I could see the sea of faces. Students, women in business suits, older couples leaning close to listen. The quiet that followed was steady, expectant. I took a breath and began. There are debts, I said, that never show up in ledgers. Trust, peace, time. When someone takes those from you, you have every right to take them back. The room went still. Heads nodded. A few people smiled softly, as if the words hit somewhere familiar. I used to believe that forgiveness meant letting everything go. I continued, but I learned that sometimes forgiveness starts with accountability, with drawing the line that says, no more withdrawals from me. It's not about revenge. It's about recovery. The silence deepened, the kind that didn't feel empty, but full. I looked out over the crowd, finding faces that mirrored versions of my own journey. Women who had carried too much, men who had been silenced. People who had paid emotional interest on debts that weren't theirs. I'm not here to talk about money, I said finally. I'm here to talk about worth, and how reclaiming it can save your life. When I finished, there wasn't applause at first, just a collective exhale. Then it came, soft, rising, steady. Afterward, people lined up to shake my hand, to share fragments of their own stories in quick emotional bursts. Some thanked me. Some just nodded and smiled. As I stepped away from the podium, a familiar voice called my name. Miss Hale. I turned. Emily Torres stood there, the journalist from Southern Living. She wore the same calm expression I remembered from her emails. I just wanted to thank you, she said, shaking my hand. Your story changed the tone of that entire conversation. You gave people permission to take back control. I smiled, surprised by how genuine it felt. I didn't mean to tell it, I said, but maybe it needed to be heard. Her smile deepened. Sometimes the quiet stories are the ones people carry the longest. By late afternoon, the conference hall was nearly empty. Volunteers stacked chairs, and the hum of conversation faded into the echo of footsteps. I walked out into the parking lot, the humid air wrapping around me like a soft blanket. It had started raining, light, almost hesitant. The pavement glistened under the yellow glow of the streetlights. I slipped my shoes off and walked the few steps to my car barefoot, the cool water seeping through the cracks in the asphalt. When I got home, the city lights shimmered against the wet streets. I set my laptop on the desk by the window and opened it, the rain still whispering against the glass. The homepage of the second ledger glowed on the screen. A single sentence at the top. For every woman who has ever been made to feel small for standing tall. I closed the lid and opened the window instead. The evening breeze was soft and sweet, carrying the smell of rain-soaked pavement. I poured myself a glass of red wine, leaning against the windowsill as the city hummed below. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly, but it didn't sound threatening, just alive. They said I wasn't welcome, I murmured to the quiet room. But they were the ones who locked the door. I took a slow sip of wine. The reflection in the glass showed a face I finally recognized. Steady older, maybe, but free. I didn't destroy their wedding, I said softly. I just stopped paying for it. And in the end, I took back every dollar, along with the kind of peace you can't buy. The rain eased into a mist, the lights of downtown Raleigh glittering through it. I set the glass down and let the silence settle around me, calm and complete. If you've ever been erased from your own story, I want you to remember this: justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet of knowing you no longer owe anyone for their mistakes. So tell me, have you ever walked away from a place that stopped seeing your worth? Share your story below. Maybe your silence too deserves to be heard.